It's your Friday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Final show of the week. Hope you guys are all having a great day out there today. Really good show today. Eric Ramsay, manager, Minnesota United Football Soccer Club, joins me here in a little bit. He's been on the job for about a year with the Loons. What has he learned? What is the outlook for this season? How do you adjust to life in a completely different place, coming from overseas, coming from England, 2 small kids, wife, family, all that, all the adjustments, everything that goes into it. And some really interesting insights from him on other teams in this market, what he is keen on watching, and what he has even learned from other coaches and sports since coming to Minnesota. So a great interview with Eric Ramsay. Listen for that here in just a few minutes. Some odds and ends at the end of the show on the Twins, on the NBA, stuff to watch for this weekend. First, though, what did I miss? If you are watching the NCAA men's basketball tournament, if you're probably watching for a bunch of different reasons. You're probably just watching because it's on and because this is a fun time of year. The first 4 days of the 64 team field, tons of fun, upsets, possibilities. Multiple games happening at once. You can always find one that's close. You can always find one that's gonna be close or you think is gonna turn. Sometimes a game gets out of hand, you flip to another one. It's just it's fun. Even if college basketball has changed, even if it has evolved, which I'll get to in a minute, it's still fun to watch the tournament. Everybody's probably still filled out a bracket. I've got a fun bracket. No money, nothing like that, but just a fun bracket, little competition with some folks. So just to see how. Anytime you have some sort of vested interest, you're going to watch that team. Did you pick an upset? Things like that. Anyway, you know all the reasons why it's fun to just watch the NCAA men's basketball tournament from a general perspective. Then there's the more specific perspective of if you are a Minnesota Gophers fan, you're probably watching the Big Ten teams to see how they're doing, and they did pretty well yesterday. Michigan wins, they hold on. Wisconsin wins in a rout. UCLA, got to get used to calling them a Big Ten team. They were just fine, they won. Purdue gets through, so everybody's doing well in the Big Ten, so you're watching for that. You are specifically, though, probably watching a couple things right now. One, Niko Medved, Colorado State, they play today, early this afternoon against Memphis. They are the 12 seed. Memphis is the 5 seed. 2 hours after that game starts, that game will be over. If Colorado State has lost, that is when things will start to get very interesting with the Gophers men's basketball coaching search because Niko Medved has been identified as the front runner. All sorts of Minnesota ties. We know all the stories of him. He's done a very good job at Colorado State. It's got them in the tournament 3 of the last 4 years. They're kind of waiting on this. They're waiting to see what happens there. The clock can really start ticking if and when Colorado State loses in the tournament. Now, if they win in the tournament today, they don't play again until Sunday. That would be the 23rd. Transfer portal opens on the 24th. Clock is ticking. If they somehow pull a couple upsets this weekend, make it to the Sweet 16, Niko Medved's not going to become available until after that transfer portal window opens. That's not so much big for the Gophers in terms of retaining players. They don't have that many players to retain. A lot of their guys this year were seniors. A lot of them had been transfers already coming in. There's a few guys I'm sure they'd love to keep, but mostly they got to hit that portal running. They got to hit the ground running, trying to fill out a roster for next year that can be far more competitive than this season. So what happens in that game starts the clock ticking, so we'll be watching that. Adjacent to that, however, is how we got here. Ben Johnson fired a week or two ago. That whole process starts when he gets fired at the end of the Big Ten tournament. At the end of their game at the Big Ten tournament. It was probably 9 days ago at this point. A midnight firing by Mark Coyle. The reasons enumerated are, we've been through them, and on their face, they're fair. He had a terrible Big Ten record, never made the NCAA tournament, just didn't feel like in 4 years they had turned any sort of meaningful corner, gotten over any kind of meaningful hump. If Mark Coyle thinks this is a program, as he said, that should be going to the NCAA tournament consistently, That has not been the case with this program. I think Richard Pitino made it twice in 8 years. Before that, Tubby Smith was a little bit more consistent, but I think they went 3 times in 6 years. Before that, you had all sorts of issues with Dan Munson not getting there. So it's been a long time since this was a consistent winner. Mark Coyle wants to get this program to a different spot. How they are going to get there is probably with money. That is the name of the game these days. It's not so much high school recruiting. That still plays a role, but it is far more about the transfer portal and player retention than it is about high school recruiting. They probably need a coach who has more ties in that area, who is better in that area. Ben Johnson came in with a kind of background as a better high school recruiter. That was what he was really good at as an assistant coach with the Gophers, with his other jobs, things like that. That was what he brought to the table. That is not as important anymore. So you add all these factors in and you say, I absolutely understand why they're making this move right now. They're going to have this influx of cash next year with the revenue sharing that should get signed off officially next month. Gophers are going to be paying $20.5 million to athletes next season. Big portion of that's going to football. A decent portion of that's going to go to men's basketball. Level the playing field a little bit from where they have been to where they are right now. However, you look at it realistically, and this is still the what if. This is the is this fair? And it was only hammered home again Thursday in the NCAA tournament. Ben Johnson never got the resources that his successor is going to have. He never got the NIL money, the money, the revenue sharing money that his predecessor is going to get. If he had that money a year ago at this offseason point, how does this story change? That's the part I keep coming back to and saying, is this fair? Elijah Hawkins, example number one. Elijah Hawkins comes in. He was a transfer into Minnesota last year, completely revamps the point guard position, gets them on a trajectory where they almost make the NCAA tournament a year ago, probably 1 or 2 wins away. Very good team, an ascending team, and then he leaves. He leaves for Texas Tech, gets almost 700,000, somewhere in that range to leave. He's gone. They don't have the money to pay Elijah Hawkins. He has had a year worthy of NIL money, but they don't have the money to pay him, so he leaves. Yesterday in the NCAA tournament, Elijah Hawkins almost had a triple-double, 14 points, 10 assists, 9 rebounds. Texas Tech wins. They advance to the second round. Example number 2, Exhibit B, however you want to look at it, if this is a court case. Pharrel Payne, Gophers, last year was terrific. He was very good. He was an ascending player. He's a Minnesota guy, Minnesota native. Gets about the same amount of money, though, as Elijah Hawkins does. Big money, over $500,000 to go play at Texas A&M. I don't begrudge either of these two guys for going. If I was their age, if I had their talent, if I didn't know what the future holds, my goodness, that is a lot of money. That is life-changing money. That does not set you up for life, but that is life-changing money if you can get it. I do not begrudge them. The system has been a little bit of wild, wild west for the last few years, but I do not begrudge the players for going and chasing down the money. However, if Payne and Hawkins were still on the Gophers this year, and we know we've been through this, but if they were still on the Gophers this season, along with Dawson Garcia, along with some of the other supporting players they had, they would have been a contending team for the NCAA tournament. There's no way around it, because look at what Payne did yesterday for Texas A&M. 25 points and 10 rebounds. They win. Hawkins and Payne are into the second round of the NCAA tournament, both of them playing instrumental roles. Hawkins played all 40 minutes yesterday for Texas Tech. They are among the best players on 2 very good NCAA tournament teams, 2 high seeds. If this was all different, if this was fair, those guys would have been on the Gophers this season. Ben Johnson would have gotten a fair shot to see what he could do with resources, with players. He didn't get to do that. That is the part of it that will never be fair, that we'll never know how things would have played out. But Ben Johnson, my goodness, he must have been sitting there on Thursday watching these guys tear it up. Happy for them. I'm sure he was happy for them. I'm sure he's got good relationships with those guys, wants them to succeed, but he's probably sitting there shaking his head, wondering the same thing I'm wondering, which is what might have been if he had been given the resources that his predecessor, which very well could be Niko Medved, which very well could happen very soon if Colorado State loses today. What if he had gotten those resources? How might this be different, and how might this be more fair?
Open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union to get no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. See details at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Good to be joined today by Minnesota United football manager Eric Ramsay. Eric, how you doing?
I'm very well, very well. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the time. First time on the show, but a lot to catch up on, a lot to get to. I guess first things first, it came to my attention. I think this past weekend was maybe the 1-year anniversary of the first match you managed with the Loons. What's that 1-year journey been like? What have you learned? What has this process been like for you?
Yeah, I think this could be an answer that it would just sort of weave here and there and could take me an hour. But to sort of focus on the big rocks, the sporting stuff has been largely great. It's obviously my first head coach role, and I always say to people that I speak to back home, it's been everything that I wanted it to be as an experience. It's had its ups and downs. It's a very rich experience, I would say, working in the MLS when you contend with everything that the nature of being in this country brings: the climate, the geography, the flights, the travel, the sort of extremities that you experience. I wouldn't have experienced working back home in the Premier League. So from that perspective, it's been great. I've loved the very multicultural, multinational nature of the league, but also our dressing room. I would say that we've probably got the most, and certainly one of the most multicultural, multinational dressing rooms in the league, in a league that is, I think, the most multinational football league on the planet. So that speaks volumes to the richness of the experience I have here. And on pitch, we had almost sort of 3 iterations of the team last year, and went through 3 very different periods. We had a really good start, a very sticky middle patch, and then we finished really, really well. And the signs so far this season are that we've been able to recapture what we were at the end of last season, which was a team that was very difficult to beat, a team that the opposition would look at and certainly anticipate many problems in playing us. So I've been really pleased with that. And the last sort of strand that I would probably pick up on would be the family strand. It's felt like far more than a year being here, for sure. And we are now really, really settled. I've got 2 young children, a 3-year-old and a nearly 2-year-old. So we between my wife and I, we've not made it easy for ourselves when all is considered, but we've been welcomed into the community phenomenally well. The club is a real family club, which is a term that gets thrown around very flippantly, I would say, in this sport, but it genuinely is, and we've been made to feel a real part of that very quickly, and that has led to us feeling like we can call this home already, I would say.
I'll circle back on dad life, family life in a little bit, because I definitely think that's some rich territory to explore. I've got 3 fairly young kids, not as young as yours, but I've been through it, and you're right in it right now. So I want to talk about that a little bit. But it's as much as of an opportunity it was for you to come here, it's also a certain leap of faith. You're coming across the ocean, you're changing leagues. What is it like to make a decision like that in the moment? What is it, as you kind of think back on just that process, what does that decision feel like in a life that can have, any different type of trajectory?
Yeah, and it wasn't an easy decision to make, in the sense that I was in a nice role at Man United. It's obviously a far more comfortable life as an assistant versus being a head coach, irrespective of the territory that you're in at Man United, which is never an easy one. But I felt like when the opportunity arose and I started to do my research, and I got a real feel for the league's trajectory, the trajectory of the sport in the country, the almost like pivotal moment that we're in this sport's history and pathway, I would say, in the country, with the World Cup, the Club World Cup, the various other sporting events that are going to bring this game to centre stage in this country. I felt like it was an opportunity that I couldn't really miss. I feel like you're getting the MLS at at its peak up until this point, and hopefully at an early stage of the league's evolution. And I can only say that I've experienced that so far. I think the level of sporting competition is high. I feel like here infrastructure is, of course, top everywhere you go. Levels of professionalism, levels of interest, media coverage, the deal with Apple, everything that's wrapped around the league. The league feels big. So I felt like I was going to get an opportunity to cut my teeth as a head coach in a competition that feels high level, in a competition that's moving in the right direction, in a competition that is certainly challenging from a technical perspective, but I was going to get to do it in a context that isn't really available to me at home, in the sense that my first job in England in the Championship, the second tier, as an example, as a head coach, would have been precarious. It's one of those leagues where 3 or 4 losses on the spin and everyone gets very uncomfortable with the prospect of relegation. Everyone gets drawn into the short-termism of being a head coach in Europe. I think in that league, the average lifespan of a head coach is about 7 months. Every job comes up within 18 months on average, whereas here that's not the case. And certainly with Minnesota, you get what we've got here is stable ownership, really sensible people in Dr. Bill McGuire and Sherry, the chief executive, and Khaled, the sporting director. There's a real sense of project, and I felt like in my first role that was going to be a really important thing. So it's only sort of justified my thinking that I had as I did take what, as you described, a bit of a leap of faith.
I've got a little bit of a 2-part question here about style of play. I guess the first one, I'm big on identity of a team, regardless of sport, regardless of team. How would you describe the identity of this year's group? Like when you are at your peak or when you are playing well, what do you do best? What do you want?
Yeah, we have a very, very clear identity. There's no one that could look at our team over the course of 10 games and not have a very clear image in their mind as to how we look. We're very difficult to beat. We defend in a very compact, organised, detailed way relative to the way the opposition play. We're very good on the counter-attack. We're very good at attacking set plays. We're not a team that has the lion's share of the ball very often, but that's by design. We want to defend in a way that's going to allow us to then attack into big spaces. I think if you were an opposition coach looking at our team, you'd feel like we're very, very difficult to break down. We're very difficult to play through, and then we can hurt teams very, very quickly. And I've been really pleased with the way we've looked over the course of the first 4 games. I think we're showing, obviously, I dig into the objective side of the game to make sure we're on track relative to where I want the team to be. And I think if you were to look at some of the stats that are wrapped around our performances so far in the areas where I want us to be strong, and I feel like we can find our edge as a team, as I've described: defensive organisation, counter-attacking, attacking set plays, quick attacks, playing in a relatively direct way. In a relatively direct way, we're in a really good place in that sense. So we've ridden a tough opening 4 games, of which we play 3 away from home, which I think necessitates a certain type of performance in this league, and we have largely been able to execute it. I think if you strip away the last 20 minutes of the previous game, which was like nothing I'd ever seen or experienced, we would be sitting here very, very happy at this point, as opposed to just satisfied with a sense of sourness, I would say.
I'll get back to that Kansas City result briefly. Now, we're not going to dwell on it, but I'll get back to it briefly. Just for a minute, just because of what it can teach you. But the second part of that identity question is that necessitated by roster, who you are right now, or is that something ingrained in you? Is that how you think a team is best suited to play over the long haul? Is that what you would choose to be an identity, no matter who is on your roster?
As a coach, I would consider myself to be someone who is toward the end of the spectrum, that is pragmatic, adaptable, flexible. I want to be able to look at a group and think, okay, well, this is the way in which we are most likely to be successful and competitive in the short to medium term. Which I think as a coach, is difficult to look much past that. I think if you look at the group that we have, we are much closer to being a team that is able to be competitive at the top of these 2 divisions, based upon what I've described so far, as opposed to being a team that is maybe 3, 4, 5 transfer windows away from being much more suited to a more possession-based style, a team that attacks in a more patient way. So me as a coach, based on the experiences I've had so far, I would like to consider myself someone who could work at various points on that spectrum. I started my career at Swansea City. I spent 3 years working with the under-21s and the under-18s, trying to distill what was a very, very patient, possession-based, almost like an iconic Premier League identity to an extent that was built upon the work of head coaches that have gone to build careers based upon that style. Brendan Rodgers, Roberto Martinez, Michael Laudrup. And I feel like I know that way of playing intricately. I know the mechanisms. I know the buttons to push from a coaching perspective. I don't feel like that way of playing is suitable for this particular group of players. And I feel like our group of players recognise that we can be elite at this level in a number of areas. What we can't be is attempt to be everything and then become nothing. So I'm very conscious of that. And I feel like if you were to watch us over the last probably 15 games, including the spell last year, you'd probably get a very similar sense, and you'd get a sense of a group of players that is invested in a certain way of playing and has experienced a relative amount of success from that, I would say. And I only really count sort of Leagues Cup onwards last year, in the sense that was when the group really came together. That was when it suddenly felt full enough to be really competitive. And I think we've recaptured that again this year, I would say. So
the Kansas City result, again, it's one match. It's like a third of the match. You were obviously disappointed. I listened to you know what you said post game. You're up 3-0. Like you said, that's like that never happens. And in most cases, you lock that down. How do you learn from it? How do you use it? What parts of it do you just say that was a one-off? I don't believe that's who we are. Like what do you do with that?
I think you certainly have to look at both sides of the coin in that sense, because I do firmly believe that was a complete anomaly. And I think if you look at the logic behind the way in which we change, the moves we make on 65 minutes, we've done that in both of the previous games leading up to that, in situations that are much more precarious, and that's ended up being a really good change for us, where we end up obviously system changes slightly, personnel changes slightly, but largely it's geared toward us becoming much more solid. The irony is that has the opposite effect this time around. Right. I think the lessons that we've tried to tease from it, and certainly when we've looked at some of the data, is we have up until 65 minutes 11 players on the pitch, or 10 outfield players that are at like 110% of what would their typical physical output be. And then as the subs come on, that drops by almost 30% per player. And that is again, not me shifting blame onto the substitutes' mentalities, their makeup as individuals, because the guys that are coming on, they are some of the most reliable, coachable, humble characters that I've come across. Sangbin, Jefferson, Owen. It's just that perfect storm of complacency, lack of concentration. Maybe when I look at myself in the mirror, the combination of a number of changes and a system change at a point at which the game is very comfortable for us, arguably doesn't help. But I would probably stand by the fact, if I made those changes 99 times again, what happened wouldn't happen. Right. So I don't want it to be something that we dwell on too much. It hasn't changed the way I think about the group. I've always been someone that wants to make sure that we have a group of players that extends beyond 12, 13, 14, and as often as possible we're making changes so people are feeling connected to what we do. I think now and again it will have a detrimental effect in a particular game over the course of a season. I feel like it'll have a net positive effect. So I've sort of been keen to stress to myself, to the staff, to the players that shouldn't skew how we view ourselves and how we make those moves.
A 3-year-old and a 2-year-old probably don't really know if you won or lost. They just know that you're coming home, that you're dad, that you're there. Like how I know how in my life, having kids, my oldest is almost 11 now, and I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. I know how that changes my perspective, how having children changed my perspective on life, my career, things like that. How does it impact your life, your job? I mean, it's a huge question, but like how is that segment of your life, how has that been part of your evolution?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously I'm a young head coach, so I'm probably in a situation that's not all that common with kids of that age. And I suppose what it prevents me from doing it, and there's good and bad to this, is spending all day every day thinking about the upcoming game, watching 10 of the opposition's games, reviewing training endlessly. I don't have the time nor the capacity. Obviously, my wife and I have put ourselves in a position where we don't have any support here. It's us one-on-one against two kids for the large majority of the time, and it's tiring. It's not 6 a.m. into work, into the gym, working on game plan, as some coaches have the luxury of doing. It's up at 5 a.m. battling with the kids until 7:30 a.m. handing over to my wife, and then me disappearing, and then we go again at 5 p.m. But the flip side of that is it does give you that sense of perspective and that sense of relief. I think I heard Thomas Frank, the Brentford manager, talk recently about he has a 24-hour rule. After he loses a game, he only gives himself 24 hours either to be happy or disappointed and bitter. I thought about that on Sunday, and I don't have that luxury. Mine is probably 6 or 7 hours by the time you fly in from Kansas, and the following morning you're up with your kids who have no idea how the day's gone previously, and they want to play Paw Patrol all day. So that's for me quite nice in the sense that Sunday was a very different day to the day it would have been had I been on my own, and had I had time to watch the game back and do all the things that typically you would do as a coach first thing. So yeah, two sides to the coin, and obviously it leads to my life being very intense and full on. But I feel like I've got a good balance, I would say.
I think that's healthy. Like I do. I hope you do too, because I feel like
I do largely. It's far more good than bad for sure.
And you know, it's a process and everything. It sounds like you guys are on the counterattack a lot in both soccer and in life with the kids. I feel like
good way of putting it, for sure. Yeah.
A lot of playing defense with kids that age, but it's definitely worth it. I get the sense that you, again, in having to kind of segment and compartmentalize a little bit, but you also seem like a very focused person, and a person who maybe has a bent towards not perfectionism, but improvement, self-improvement, making sure all the boxes are checked, things like that. Does that describe your personality and kind of how not just your managing plays out, but how your life plays out?
Yeah, it does. And not in a perhaps a sort of religious, restrictive way as people would expect, but I know what I need to do from a personal perspective to feel in a good place when I'm with the players. I obviously have to play a certain role at home. I like to keep fit. I like to train. I like to eat well. And I do feel that ends up bleeding into how you manage a group, how you are as a person, how people see you. So, I feel like I'm pretty balanced in that sense. And I've got a good perspective, I would say, on the importance of the game. I don't find myself, I'm not someone who gets uncontainably frustrated with results or with players, and I think it hopefully doesn't manifest as a lack of emotion, lack of passion, but I would say, pretty technocratic. I can see things in a relatively objective way, and I try and make sure that I stay level-headed with the players. And I feel like over the course of a season, and certainly in my experience so far, that has stood me in good stead. I think last year, had I been one of those coaches that couldn't contain their frustration during that summer period where we found ourselves in a really tricky position player availability-wise, I feel like I could possibly have lost that group at that point. But I think because I always retained a level of objectivity and just trying to go through the process of improving the group that we had in front of us at that point, I felt like taking that approach then stood us in really good stead when we got out of that period and were able to attack the last 10, 12 games. So last year was a year where I learned a lot about myself, and there was a lot of stuff that I feel like I would do well to carry forward in my career, I suppose.
Couple more things for you. Appreciating your time here. This is a vastly crowded sports market. There's professional teams all over the map. There's college teams. From what I understand, you've had a chance to take in some of this, right? You've watched some of the local teams. You've been out to watch them in person, watch them. Otherwise, what do you enjoy about that? What do you learn from watching other coaches? How does that kind of play out across the Twin Cities?
I've really enjoyed it. I've been to everything here so far. Mostly I've been to the Timberwolves because we have really good access to very good seats through the owner here, and I've felt like that's a sort of sporting experience like no other, being sat courtside for those games. And there's a couple of things that I've then followed up on. I've watched endless hours of YouTube videos on basketball, a sport that I'm not that familiar with. But me and my assistant Dennis from the UK is a big basketball fan, big Lakers fan, and we have far more conversations about basketball now, and some of the intricacies of the way teams defend. I think the one thing for me is that if you could the game is obviously so different on us from the perspective of scale. And that means that every action in basketball is much more consequential than your typical action in an 11v11 big scale sport. And I think as a consequence of that, the level of concentration defensively from basketball players is just insane. If you could bottle that and give it to 11 footballers, which to an extent we show maybe more than a lot of other teams in this league, it would make a big difference. So I feel like some of that stuff that you see really up close, just the level of concentration, focus in the players' eyes is ridiculous. And then there's a lot of transfer from that game to our sport in terms of set plays, and some of the intricacy of that sort of stuff. As a consequence of clicking on a lot of stuff on YouTube around the Timberwolves and the Vikings, I see a lot of the coaches pop up in the locker room, the way they speak to players, the way they interact is really interesting to me. I think in the NFL, as an example, I think the coach is much more of a showman. Typically in that sport, it's much more of a spectacle, but typically phenomenal communicators, really extrovert, really passionate, and there's definitely some of that can transfer to the way I interact with the players and our sport. So I've tried to drink as much of that in as possible, for sure.
Final thing, this might not be a perfect question or perfect answer, but everybody wants to kind of like put parameters around seasons. Coaches like to say, we're just trying to get better. What do you have, like, as 2025 plays out, do you have certain goals that you think are achievable, realistic from a result standpoint, or are you just kind of focused on the process? Where do you land on that?
I am, but I would also, it's human nature to think slightly bigger picture, and I can give you a slightly more interesting answer than just saying that I'm focusing on tomorrow and the upcoming game, which is largely how I think about things. But I think given last year we used the most players in the MLS last year. We were, as I say, going through various iterations of the team as the season went on, and even in spite of that, we obviously had a really competitive finish. And it would be unambitious of me to say that we didn't want to better last year's finish, which was sixth in the Western Conference, and obviously we made the conference semi-finals. And we came to a bit of an abrupt stop against Galaxy, unfortunately. But I feel like if we are, as we should be this year, able to handle some of the difficulty of the double game weeks in the summers and the tournaments and the international breaks better, then, and based upon how we've started so far and where I feel the group is, I would say we are targeting a better finish than last year's in the league for sure, which would take us hopefully into the top four and have the opportunity to play a home playoff game. So yeah, that's where the group is at, and I think again it would be a logical conclusion to come to that one.
Big home match this weekend, so that's an opportunity, right? They're all opportunities, though, right?
Yeah, for sure. We again, unfortunately, against Galaxy, every time we come up against them, there seems to be an influence of the international break. Unfortunately, last year when we played in the playoffs, obviously we've had a 3-week wait with a number of our players away as we go into that. They're a team that doesn't suffer from losing internationals. So this week we lose 5 of our starting players. They lose none. So there always seems to be that layer to the games against them. But I would say this year I'm really excited to see what that brings, because it will for sure allow us to put on the pitch some players that we haven't seen to the extent that we would like to so far. A couple of the new guys might get more of an opportunity to impact, and we have always taken the stance that is next man up. I want to make the fact that we don't have a group that has a really clear hierarchy with 3 superstars sat at the top and everyone else playing a supporting role. What we've got is a relatively flat hierarchy, I would say, and I want to be a team that rotates, that can use the bench well. So this weekend really feeds that, and I know the players are itching to put right what was a big wrong from last Saturday. So hopefully that transpires into a really energetic, aggressive home performance, which when we've been at our best, we've seen.
Eric Ramsay, Absolutely enjoyed the time here with you. Best of luck this weekend. Best of luck this season, and hopefully we'll chat again soon down the road.
Oh, my pleasure. Really, really good to meet you, and I'm sure we'll chat again.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely loved getting to know Eric Ramsay a little bit better. Hope you guys enjoyed that as well. Thought those perspectives were really interesting. Loved the part in particular about how he watches Wolves games up close, sees how they play defense, wonders how you can translate that possession by possession intensity to soccer, like taking little pieces from other sports. I think that's fascinating how he watches post-game. I think he's watching Kevin O'Connell post-game, watching him kind of do his thing in the locker room, like picking up little pieces. That's what good coaches do. That's what great coaches do. I think Eric Ramsay is well on his way to becoming a very good coach with Minnesota United. He's got them in a very good position so far this season. We will see where that takes them the rest of the year and beyond. Let's finish quickly with the cooler. A few things of note, a few things to watch. Gophers women's hockey team versus Wisconsin today in the Frozen Four. That is, of course, a big one. Wisconsin is terrific. They're the top seed, but that's at Ritter Arena. The Gophers can find some magic. They will be aiming for another NCAA title. So that game is today with a spot in the championship game on the line. A couple injury things of note. Brooks Lee, back issues again. They're treating it as day-to-day, but I also read in that story, StarTribune.com, that back issues cost him the first 6 weeks of his minor league season last season. And, of course, you know Royce Lewis already sidelined with that hamstring. Brooks Lee was probably in line for some playing time. We'll see how that injury impacts any kind of roster decisions, any kind of Twins comings and goings in the next couple of weeks. Steph Curry did not finish the game for the Warriors last night. They did manage to finish off and beat the woeful Raptors by 3, but Steph Curry's injury, hip injury, sound like a hip contusion. That bears watching because that is the team the Wolves have still the best chance of chasing down if they are going to compete and be a top 6 team in the West. Another chance for redemption for the Wolves tonight. They lost to New Orleans 2 nights ago. They play New Orleans again at Target Center. I think we should expect to see a much different Wolves team tonight. If we don't, that will be a sign of trouble more than anything else. That will do it for me today. Royce on Monday. Tons of good stuff coming up. Until then, I'm Michael Rand. Have a great weekend. Back at it again on Monday.